Welcome to Essential Ingredients, powered by Next Gen Purpose. EI serves up thoughtful conversations with industry leaders and pioneers who support a regenerative future for our food system. The stories shared by our guests are meant to spark curiosity and inspire informed global change. Good afternoon and welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm your host, Justine Reichman. Today with me is Aaron Luo, who is the co-founder and CEO of Mercado Famous. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you, Justine. Very excited to be here and can't wait to dive into some exciting topics.
Me too. And for those that are not familiar with Mercado Famous, maybe you could just make a short intro so that they have some idea of what we're talking about for the next 20 to 30 minutes.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Aaron. I'm the co-founder CEO of Mercado Famous. If I boil it down, what Mercado Famous is trying to bring the best of the Spanish culture to the American consumers. So yes, we're starting with the charcuterie and the wonderful jamons and chorizos and salchichons. But the ultimate goal is really to introduce this wonderful culture that we grew up with to the American people. So that's kind of the best way to really summarize. And in all honesty, when we sat down initially and think through the brand and define what success looked like, the success for us is not to sell more ham, right? The success for us is to bring a little bit of Spanish, easygoing, enjoy life type of culture for the US, which is the country we currently live in. So I think that's a good way to start a conversation and how we're thinking about the brand.
I appreciate that. And it brings up a couple topics for me that I didn't even know we were going to talk about. So that's exciting. The first thing you said was about culture. And I think culture often is really integral to people building their business and creating a better for you food option, right? So for example, my question to you is, you go out and you want to get your jamons and your, kind of Spanish charcuterie, right? And there's some options in New York, right? But the question is, are you getting the best possible product? And how does that get impacted or translated better, not impacted, translated when it's not in Spain? So for me, I'm curious, you dove into this. Did you dive into it because you felt like that was not, your culture wasn't represented in the US?
To a certain extent, yeah. Just to kind of take a step back and just give a little background story on how we started Mercado Famous. So both Carmen and I, who's my co-founder, her name is Carmen Chen Wu, we're both Chinese, but both grew up in Spain. She was actually born and raised in a town east of Spain called Valencia, which is a coastal town of Spain. And I was raised in Madrid, which is the capital. And, for those of you who don't know about Spanish culture, it's a wonderful country. It's a wonderful culture. For those of you who have been there, you can know that there's the siesta and there's the families, there's the value in food. And food has always been something that brings people together, right? And what's interesting is that before even diving into the product itself, one of the things we always felt that we miss, right, after living in New York and the States for over 20 years, is that moment with family and friends. Funny enough, the story I always love to tell is that when we go out for dinner, in Spain, you go out dinner around 10-ish, maybe 9:30, 10-ish in the evening. You start with your appetizers, your food, your drinks, and then your desserts. The whole thing, it's about a 3-hour ordeal, especially the right? Funny enough, in the States, even if for celebration, right, we will go out and actually have a meal, the whole thing probably will last 45 minutes. Immediately when the dessert ends, it's like, oh, let's get the check and bounce. And we're like, wait, it's not just about eating the food, it's about enjoying, right? So you touched on culture, like that culture we missed. It just happens that, we grew up with charcuterie. Jamon is something that's very representative of Spain. It's one of our hero products, when I think about overall Spanish culture and the Spanish cuisine overall. And we just struggled with finding good charcuterie in the US from Spain. So, what we found was either really expensive stuff that was really great, but too overpriced, or we felt that we found stuff that were, I don't want to call it cheap, but more economical, but the quality wasn't really there. And when we dug into that space a little bit deeper, we said, hey, you know what? There's actually something to be said here to bring something that is, non-ostentatious, something that's good quality and still very accessible for the American culture or American consumers. So that's kind of how we started thinking through starting Mercado Famous. But, back to answering your question about culture, I think the cultural aspect of things was something that we really, really miss. Like I said in the beginning, right? Success for us is not to sell more products. It's more to share how we grew up with in terms of culture and family and utilizing food as a vehicle to bring people together. And that's kind of the overall message we're trying to tell with our brand.
Well, I that resonates a lot with me, because to me, when I want to have friends and family over, I want to present a beautiful meal, and you're doing it over food, and you're connecting with friends and family. And to me, it's not about how quickly I can shovel the food in my face, but rather to create a beautiful plate, to create something that maybe we'll talk about, or that will, it just is a conduit to bring us together, family,
100%.
friends. I mean, if you think about for holidays, for me, are less about the religion and more about the community and the people being brought together.
Couldn't agree more.
And the food, because
it's
like
a wonderful vehicle for bringing people together. I'll give you an example, right? So one of the products we sell, so kind of breaking that down a little bit, right? And I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but if you think about the assortment that we're currently bringing in, and we're in the process of expanding that, but we have sliced meats. So they come in 2 ounces prepackaged, vacuum sealed, very easy to open, very easy to consume. So that's kind of the bulk of our assortment, but we do bring 1 leg of jamon. We're going to bring a few other varieties later on in the next few months, but the main one we currently have is our serrano jamon, and it's a whole leg. The thing is between 15 to 20 pounds, right? And I kid you not, every single Thanksgiving in my house, right? And I'm married now, my wife is American, and we have her family come over, and of course we have friends and family. Immediately after they come to the kitchen, the first thing they see the jamon, the first thing they ask is, what is that? It's a wonderful conversation opener, right? And as the evening go along, even after the big meal, you see the entire family slowly gravitate, especially in the evening, slowly gravitate towards the jamon, drinking wine, drinking beer, drinking a cocktail, and slicing the meats. It really, again, it's not just the actual meat itself. It's, to your point, the conduit, right? The vehicle to bring people together and have a conversation. Could be about the meat, could be about anything.
Right. I think I agree. And a friend of mine, my friend's husband, he's from Spain, and they have one in their kitchen. And I was like, I want this. I want one in my kitchen. And they have the slicer thing, there's like a thing that goes around it. And then anyway, that's all I wanted. Last year for Hanukkah, I said to Tim, I want one of those for Hanukkah.
Yeah, no, it really, it's a great conversation opener. It's and honestly, it looks pretty badass on the kitchen table. So
I couldn't agree more. It's a showstopper. Honestly, it's unusual. It's at least in this culture, it's unusual. And the truth is, I love to get charcuterie when I go out. I used to being from New York. I remember when Italy first opened.
Yeah.
And they have tons of different kind of charcuterie there.
You do.
And it was like the best game in town for what I knew, right?
Yep.
Comparing to like going to get the salami like they have with the cheese and the little packages at Starbucks, right?
It's very interesting. You bring up an interesting point. So we actually studied quite a bit about the Italian charcuterie industry versus the Spanish charcuterie. And, not to kind of digress the conversation too much, but, there was a lot to be learned actually about how the Italian charcuterie was penetrated into the American pantries, right? So a couple of things we learned. First of all, the overall category came into the United States not as individual brands, but as collectively category. So, I think the category itself was very smart and very good. I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional, but they first promoted the actual product itself, then they promoted the individual brands.
Interesting.
So when you think about Italian charcuterie, most people, and we have some data around this too, most people don't actually think about brands right away. They think about type of charcuterie, right?
Right.
Salami,
Yes.
pepperoni,
Exactly.
tabigol, and so on and so forth. So Spanish charcuterie is a little different. Spanish charcuterie, yes, you think about the jamon, but you do think about distinct brands because actually there's a lot of art in terms of how you actually cure the meat itself.
That
And
was
we
actually
lost.
my next question in terms of within the Spanish culture and within the way, that you prepare your charcuterie versus Italy, are there, what are the differences that you saw? And then a separate question, a follow-up to that one is when you look at yours versus the other ones from Spain, I'd love for you to just talk to us a little bit about the differences.
Yeah,
And
no,
why you went that and why you made those choices.
yeah, I'm gonna try to be short and sweet because I can talk about this for days, right?
Okay, let's break it down. So what do you see as the greatest difference between Spanish charcuterie and Italian charcuterie?
Yeah, again, for me personally, that's my personal opinion based on the data analysis we've done and based on all the years now that we've been embedded in this industry, right? Is that there's a couple things, and again, probably just to try to compare, I don't want to say apples to apples because really you're not comparing apples to apples, right? But just to kind of bring the comparison a little bit close to each other, I'm going to take our jamon and compare that with a prosciutto. Okay. Because it's not fair to compare like jamon with like a pepperoni, right? Because you're really not comparing apples to apples per se. If you do compare jamon with prosciutto, I think it comes down to two things. One, it's the breed of the pig. And the second thing is how you raise them in terms of what they eat and how they are being bred. So let me break that down a little bit. In terms of breed itself, it's really the genes, right? So and we have several type of family of pig that we work with, but the main one that we work with is our Iberian pig. In Spanish, is the Iberico pig, right? It's a pig that is unique to the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal. Yes, you could export it. Matter of fact, there are many other nations and vendors and brands that have tried to export that breed and try to raise that somewhere else, unsuccessfully for most part. But I think when I compare to like a prosciutto di Parma, their pig breed is very different than the breed that we use. So that's one big comparison. And what that translates to is, look, the Iberian pig at the end of the day is a very close relative to the wild boar. And what that does is that it's a very lean meat and it's a pig that likes to roam around, that likes to be outside. Okay. So that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing is how we raise them, right? So for Spanish jamon, the pigs that we use and the farms that the farm that we work with, again, there's different varieties, but the main one that we use, they actually live the last 8 months of their life roaming free in the valley that we're in, eating acorns pretty exclusively. And what that does basically is that, animals ends up tasting what they end up eating. So because they eat acorn for the last period of their life before they're sacrificed, they bring that very nutty umami flavor to the overall meat itself, which is very different than the prosciutto that we're comparing to. And then in addition to that, right, prosciutto, it's a much younger curation meat, so it takes much shorter time to cure it. Hence, it's a little bit saltier. The curation itself, it's a lot different in terms of the process. For us, we obviously don't use any preservatives. The only main
that was what I was going to ask you about: preservatives, nitrates, nightshades.
Nothing. The only thing we use is Mother Nature climate. So, our farm, it's actually located in a very strategic spot in Spain where it's in the valley. So the actual air flows in a very specific way. And the only ingredient we really use for the jamon, it's sea salt. That's the only thing we use.
So my question to you is, so often when I look at the packaging and I go to the shops and I want to get some jamon or charcuterie or whatever, and I'm not always, in all fairness, I don't always know where it's coming from, right, when I'm buying it. Maybe I haven't looked before, if I'm being completely honest, but now that I'm having this conversation, I probably will take this information with me when I go shopping. But I've only seen a few places, one at the farmer's market, where they don't have the nitrates or the nightshades. And that's a big deal for me because I don't eat nightshades and nitrates, and a lot of people don't.
Yep.
What is the impact of, or why do some people use this and other people don't? Does it change the flavor?
It
Does it
doesn't
keep
necessarily change the
longer? Does it
flavor.
keep longer?
It changes two things, right? It changes the look and it changes the preservation of the meat. So sometimes vendors or brands will use nitrate into their meats to have a better presentation, to make the meat a little bit more red and a little bit more appetizing. The reality is that depending on, and to all fairness, right, the nitrate, most of the time, if you are going to use it, you use it in sausages. So not in prosciutto or not in jamon, but more in encased sausage itself.
Okay.
So, but again, it's for mainly two purposes. One is for presentation, because there are sausages, depending on how you prepare them, depending on the meat and so on and so forth, that if you don't use nitrate, it doesn't look really appetizing. It really doesn't. I mean, I've seen it before and it's like, yeah, I really don't want to eat that. I don't care how good it is. I don't want to eat that. So brands and vendors use nitrate to have a better presentation. The second thing is conservation, right? So, once you use preservatives, it actually can last longer. For us, we actually use a very specific vacuum seal technology that relies more on the vacuum or the sealing of the actual packaging once it's sliced versus letting the preservative do its own thing. So that's the reason why we don't touch nitrate, in any of our products. But Justine, there's one point that you brought up, which I thought was interesting, which is where does the pig come from? I think often we don't ask that question, right? Because it's like, well, pig is a pig. I don't care where it comes from. If it tastes good, it tastes good. And that often it's not the case. And again, I'm geeking out a little bit, right? Because I'm in this industry. I'm passionate and I love what I do. The reality is that the reason we ended up forming Mercado Famous and working with the farm that we did is because we actually can trace back to the great grandfather of the pigs that we actually use, because the lineage is so defined. And that's important to us, right? It's important to us because we can confirm that these are healthy pigs, right? There's no diseases, there's nothing, that's going to harm the human, the people that we're going to be consuming them. It's going to guarantee quality, right? There's specific type of pigs that we like in terms of how lean they are, or the muscle to fat percentage ratio. And it's something that we actually take it very seriously. Versus, to your previous question, what's the difference between our product versus other products from Spain? A lot of the mass-produced jamon or charcuterie brands, they don't source from the single farm. They don't source from the single place, if you may. A lot of them are communes, if you may. A lot of them are communities. And look, I'm not criticizing it. I'm simply stating the fact.
No,
right?
and I hear you, and my question is, how does that affect their consistency and their ability to create a product that when consumers go to get it, they know that they're going to always get a consistently good product? Sometimes
it's chemical products, right? Because if the raw material is not consistent, because you're not sourcing from one single source, you're sourcing from the community of different farmers. To your point, how do you ensure the quality of consistency? And the way they do it, it's by industrializing the entire process, right? So you get them through the entire conveyor belt, right? It's like a production chain. And if one batch is slightly less fat, more lean, whatever it is, they use chemicals. A lot of them do. I'm not going to say names, but a lot of them use that chemical mix into the conversation to make sure that it comes out consistent at the end. Now, some consumers don't care, and they just want to pay a decent price for certain products. We feel like the community that we're speaking to in terms of our customers do care, and we want to do our best job to educate them on the process.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And I think what you're doing also will inspire other people to build better products too, because the more we have access to better products, the greater the demand is going to be, because people are going to be able to taste the difference, feel the difference, experience the difference. And the more we can showcase why you've made these choices and give people the information, they're in a place to make more of an educated or informed choice.
100%. And it definitely comes from the consumers. Brands will do what the customers want. And if as consumers, we don't hold brands accountable, they're always going to go to the route of least resistance, right? It's that, okay, it's almost like how much I can get away with, right? Without you complaining and within the price that I'm charging you. So I agree. I think, our goal is, of course, again, bring the best of Spain, bring the culture, but also just educate folks along the line, right? It's to say like, hey, look, here's an alternative charcuterie that we're offering. And here's how we're going about raising the pigs, sacrificing the pigs, preparing the meats, and how we bring it to the United States. I don't want to say we're better or worse. That's not for me to say. But to your point, I think any conscious consumer, when they see the two things together, I think they probably will gravitate towards, I think, the latter, in terms of caring about the quality and caring about all that. So yeah, it's an important point.
Yeah, I agree. And you just mentioned that what a company changes their trajectory or changes a product based on the consumer, right? So, and that's really what's key. And so I'm curious what feedback you've gotten from your consumers to be able to direct you in the direction you're headed.
Yeah, I mean, we're still young. So we're still in the process of gathering a lot of that feedback, right? I think a lot of it comes to education. We've had a lot of customers saying like, wow, a lot of things that you guys are telling us, it's very informative. Tell us more, right? Get more information on the website. Do more events or get more into the restaurants or get more into the grocery stores. We want to learn more of that. So we taking that piece of feedback very specifically and thinking through how do we actually effectively educate the customers. Just because, I think when they hear the story I just said, right, as far as how we thinking about farming and sustainability and raising our animals in the right way and so on and so forth, people want to learn about that. Another thing that we've been thinking about quite a bit, which is very interesting, is, would jamon from Spain ever go mainstream? And the reason I say that is because, look, to really have a scale in this business, right, we really hope at one point we'll go mainstream and be able to reach the broader audience. And it's an interesting question because, look, when I ask you about Italian food, and let's just play a little game here for a minute, right? If I say, Justine, Italian food, would you ever call Italian food ethnic? Pizza, would you call pizza ethnic food?
I don't think pizza is Italian anymore.
That's what I'm saying, right? I think it was very well adopted, right, by the American people, right, by the American culture.
I think there's New York pizza, which has a culture.
For
and
sure.
there's Chicago pizza that has a culture.
For sure.
But being Italian, I mean, I've been to Italy. I mean, I ate other things other than pizza. That's not what I thought of when I went to go out to eat, to be honest, to your point. But you see the correlation.
In general, right? Like,
yeah.
I feel like the Italian culture, right, or the cuisine, it's so well penetrated, right, and in a scalable way into the American culture that it's no longer ethnic, or let's put it this way, if it's ethnic, I think it's a lot less than Greek, Chinese, Mexican, Spanish, Egyptian, you know what I mean? Like it's so when I think about, but then what's interesting is that when you look at the Italian charcuterie and the Spanish charcuterie, the taste profile, it's similar. Of course, they're different based on everything I just mentioned before. But at the end of the day, charcuteries and taste profile is very similar, right? They're from Mediterranean and there are some very distinct differences, but at the end of the day, you're selling pure meats. My goal, right, that we're thinking about a lot from the consumers that we've been talking to as far as feedback is, what are some of the effective ways we can try to go the route of making the Spanish food a little bit more mainstream and potentially changing the dialogue a little bit so that we can actually incorporate that into fried rice, incorporate the Spanish charcuterie into pizza, or, make it an ingredient into pierogies, from Poland. You know what I mean? Like it's once you start thinking that ingredient more as a mainstream, the creativity starts flowing a lot more than just like, well, it's Spanish jamon. The only way you can eat it is really by cutting it and drinking it with, either with wine. And there's so much more to it. So we think a lot in those terms as far as like, how do we educate our customers based on their feedback, right? In making them more mainstream, not just to sell more meat, but more essentially incorporating the ingredient that's part of the other cuisines within the US, especially in a country like ours in the US, right? That is so international. So that's something we think a lot about based on that feedback that we've received from the customers.
It also sounds from what you said that maybe not from the customers, but maybe from your perspective, that it would be nice to have this penetrate all the different cultures so that it can be integrated into the recipes or into what people are preparing, so that it's not this is not just jamon, this can be used with different recipes regardless of culture, regardless of ethnicity.
100%. And I see that happening with a lot of other wonderful ingredients and produce from other culture, right? Mexican culture, right? I know we briefly talked about that in the beginning of the conversation, have so many different ingredients that's slowly getting penetrated in a wonderful way into other cultures. Adobo, for example, right? Or jalapeno peppers, even though jalapeno you can debate that's Californian versus but my point is that I think the more you start introducing these ingredients into the American culture, right, and try to make it mainstream, we encourage and we want to celebrate that, making it into other cultures and other cuisines. So yeah, it's not going to be overnight, but that's something that we definitely are aspiring to do.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that with me. I want to go back to the beginning when you started this business, right?
Yeah.
You have your partner who is also from Spain, and you felt like a little piece of you, I guess, was still in Spain, and you wanted to bring it to the US so that you could share your culture and create a more accessible cured meat. And so my question as a follow-up to that is, you had this idea. What did you do next? How did you take it from idea to and build out your company?
Yeah, I think, the road of starting new brands and new business, and coming from somebody who, my family are entrepreneurs. I come from corporate background, but always had this bug, right? This entrepreneurship bug inside me. And the early days are hard. Any founders would tell you, early days are dark, they're lonely, they're cold, and it's fun. You wake up in the morning not really knowing what's going to happen, but it's scary. I think, kind of break that down. For us, it was finding the right product. I think everything, especially, and I know we touched on this a little bit early on, for us, more we discover, especially because we come from a fashion background. I think, I didn't mention this before, but, one of our brands that we manage is a brand called Cara, that we are in the luxury handbag space. Another topic for another conversation another day, but, but within luxury fashion, product design is very important, right, to us. And product is everything. We always say product is queen, product is queen, product's queen. And unless you product design, it's unique and different, you're selling BS, right? Especially in fashion, in luxury fashion. And the interesting thing when we started Mercado Famous was that more we dug into CPG, consumer packaged good industry, more we felt that product is almost like a second thought. We felt that marketing and packaging and labeling design and graphic design on the different packages was far more important, I think, for a lot of CPG brands than the actual ingredients and the products and so on and so forth. Now, to be fair, I think a lot of new brands are starting to change that a lot bit more, which we applaud and celebrate. But especially when I look at mass brands, like, and again, I don't want to name names here, but, I guess I can say beverage. I'm just going to pick on beverage, for example, as a CPG brand. Like, how much different is seltzer water? Like it's not. It really is not, right? If you think it is, you got fooled. and because it's all packaging. It's like, I'm selling water. I'm packaging, water differently and selling you on the idea that you're drinking better water than the previous version. Anyways, long story short, we said enough. When we do this, we want to make sure the product is different and better. Sorry, I caught myself there. Not better, different than what's out there. So we spent, even though the brand was launched in 2022, we spent a good 2.5 years. Of course, COVID was in between, so slow us down a little bit. But yeah, we spent about 2.5 years really finding the right team that we want to invest in. And what's interesting is this, right? Before we landed on the current partner that we have, we actually found a few really great partners that we would love to have worked with. The problem was that they were very small and they had no scale, right? They had a farm, great recipe, great family, loved the actual lineage of the pigs, but they had 250 pigs. I can't scale a brand with 250 pigs. It's just not enough, right? So, how do you go no mass, but how do you ensure that you can scale, but at the same time still have all the wonderfulness that I mentioned before, right? In terms of, taste and recipe and, human practices and sustainable practice and so on and so forth. So that was really the hardest thing. Once we got that knocked out and kind of get very comfortable in terms of who we want to invest in terms of the supply chain partner, everything else, I don't want to say it was easy, but it was definitely more mechanical, right? So finding the right branding partner to actually help us bring our vision to life and putting pen to pencil in terms of our vision, finding the right distribution channels. We come from an e-commerce background, so that's kind of our bread and butter. So we knew how to go DTC from day one, right? In terms of how we're going to distribute this thing to the world, if you may. But yeah, I think, coming from kind of luxury fashion background, really product quality and product uniqueness and differentiation through products was kind of our North Star.
I think that's a really important message to share here, because there's so many other founders that tune in or watch the video and maybe asking themselves the same question, maybe struggling with creating that great product and focusing on the wrong things. So I appreciate you sharing your insight and your struggles with that, because I think that it's something that can resonate with so many people in the space and building any business, frankly, building any business.
I totally agree. And we have the opportunity nowadays, right? That, we're not that old, but, we have an opportunity to mentor other, aspiring entrepreneurs or students, whether they're in design or whether they're in business. And I tell them, my number one thing is, what are you selling? What's your product? What's your value differentiation, right? Why should the world need another whatever you're selling? And if you can have a compelling story of why your product, right, is, or your service for that matter, it doesn't have to be a physical product. If you can really clearly articulate what that is, you don't have a business. You're going to get chewed in the world. So that's our lesson. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but
I think they're all important to share, because everybody's got a different challenge. Everyone comes to the table with different needs. And many times whether it's a founder or a researcher or an investor, so many different kinds of opportunities come up and they're not sure which way to go. And when they come to a crossroads, hearing a story like yours may say, I really do need to focus on the product. Product is really important. But if I can get my product, then I can do, design after. But really what's important is the product. And so hearing that from your perspective, I think can really support others to do better for themselves and think about what's really important.
I'm glad.
For me, that's important, right? I want to produce the best podcast ever. I want to be able to share stories from founders, researchers that are changing the future of food, giving us greater access to healthy food. And the minute I compromise on what I'm presenting, the minute I take a stand and I tell you this is better than that, I'm not doing what I set out to do, right? And when I am given guests or guests approach me, I have to make sure that they're delivering the right kinds of information. I don't have to agree with it, but I have to be able to curate the right kind of conversations, because when people come to listen, they've given me their time, and I have to continue to be worthy of their time. If I give them stories and have conversations with folks that don't share these insights, I think I'm doing a disservice.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I always say this, and maybe it's the old school Amy, you know, growing up in both China and also in Europe and in Spain, is that, you know, we have this thing in China that we say that we can smell BS, you know, from pretty far away if you are from the trade. And you know, as a brand person, as a product person these days, right? It's very funny because every time I discover a new brand, first thing I ask myself is this a BS marketing brand that's basically selling me on their label, right? Or is this product truly unique and different, and that, you know, I don't mind paying more. You know, and I'm a value shopper, right? I like value, but I don't mind paying a little bit more if it's truly a unique product. Now, I don't want to pay more if it's a commodity, right? If it's a commodity, I want to go the cheapest way possible. I'm getting it from Amazon. But it's
I agree. And so
right?
just to digress and go back to when you decided to start this business. And, you know, I know it hasn't been that long, but at what moment did you realize that this was a viable idea in business? What was that moment for you?
Yeah, you know so I tell you exactly the moment, because I remember this specifically. First of all, you know, because we operate different businesses, to be fair, right? We weren't under the pressure of, you know, like, we have to make X amount by this day, otherwise my cash ends and I gotta go back to corporate, right? Because I know for many entrepreneurs, they're under the gun, and we were under the gun for our first set of businesses like that, where it's like, hey, look, you know, you got 6 months to bring this much, and if you don't, you know, either you sell the company or go back to find a job. We treat it very much organically, you know, which is good and bad in the sense that we, you know, we didn't overinvest. You know, we made our mistakes. I don't want to say we didn't along the way when it comes to marketing, customer acquisition here and there, and so on and so forth. But, you know, we really wanted to really take it steady and learn. But to answer your question, when we realize that this is something that could be a viable business, it's when we start getting, you know, I remember the specific time, over 20 inbound retail stores calling us and say, how do we carry your product? And bear in mind, the reason I say this particular moment really struck us, because we started this business actually didn't want to do anything to do with wholesale. Because of our, you know, because of our DTC and e-commerce background, we initially set this business to be strictly DTC, you know, just because we know how to acquire customers effectively. You know, we've done it for 7+ years with Kara and other businesses that we, you know, had the chance to mentor and watch. You know, we everything from branding, shipping, you know, initially was all set to go DTC. And we did zero outreach, right, when it comes to wholesale, as far as like, hey, would you carry our product? Which is very different than CPG, other CPG brands. If you look at most of the CPG brands, they start with going mass and going the wholesale route, and then it's like, oh, maybe we should do DTC, you know, almost like an afterthought. And that's the moment that struck us, right? Is that, okay, you know, we didn't do any advertising. We didn't, you know, we did a little bit PR, but we didn't do a lot of advertising. And the fact that I think a lot of these brands, and they weren't major brands, by the way, they weren't major retailers. They were specialty stores, okay, that perhaps don't have gazillion different stores nationwide, but they are what we call influencers in the respective community. You know, so they might be in Boston, San Francisco, LA, and so on and so forth, that might have 1 or 2 stores, but hey, guess what? People in the 50-mile radius go there to buy specific things, right? And trust their name. For those guys to reach out to us and say, hey, I trust, you know, I tried your product somewhere, or I saw your product somewhere, would like to actually use your product or carry your product. That's when we're like, okay, you know what? The product is starting to resonate with the people that we like. So yeah, that was a proud moment. You know, if I had like a proud dad moment, that was it. That was one of them.
I would imagine. I mean, seeing those emails it'd make my heart flutter, and I'd be so excited. I'd be like, I wouldn't know what to do next. I just know that there'd be a big smile, and I'd be like, okay, it seems
that's when you know you're
working here.
That's right. And the volumes are not huge. You know, we're not talking about gazillion, you know.
Well, to that point, how many different products do you have?
So right now we have 7 products.
And then what are you working on going forward with some new SKUs to include?
Yep. So we're looking to add a pretty exciting lineup of assortments coming up in the next few months. We are being regulated by the USDA. So our friends in the USDA, did a really good job in terms of regulating the space and making sure everything is up to par. So we're going through that process as we speak. And yeah, I mean, hopefully, knock on wood, in the next few months, we can present another addition to the assortment, which is very exciting.
Okay, so in the meantime, if people want to get your product, what's the best way to get it?
Well, I would say the main thing is go to mercadofamous.com. That's when we tell our story, showcase our product. I'll have a lot of cool recipes that are not necessarily always 100% typical Spanish. There's a lot of fun things that we like to play with. So that's the best place to go to check out our products. You can also check us out on Instagram at mercadofamous.com. We share recipes, fun stories, founder story. You'll see me and my founder talking to our audience and sharing, different things that comes to mind. So it's a pretty organic and fun place. So that's the two best place to find us.
I so appreciate you joining me today. I can't wait to try the product. I need to get me some of the product.
We gotta make sure we gotta get that right.
I think so. Yeah.
We gotta get you the product.
Yes. And then
thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, I know that you have this new launch coming up. We'd love to stay in touch so that maybe we could be part of that process and share it with our followers and listeners. I know that they'd be eager to see your next product come out and follow along with you.
We'd love to share that with you. Definitely will keep you in the loop, Justine.
Awesome. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks again. It's been a blast.
To learn more about these episodes and access show notes, go to nextgenpurpose.com and choose podcast. If you like this episode, head to Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform to subscribe and leave us a review. Visit the Next Gen Purpose YouTube channel to subscribe to our EI videocast and give this episode a like while you're there. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Next Gen Purpose and connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Justine_Reichman. Thanks for joining us.